Okay.
All right, all right, all right. I am super excited to start this show, the Austin Aries show. He's been canceled twice. Let's not try to make it a third time. Austin's a great guy. He's a good friend, and I'm excited to get to know him a little bit more and share some of his feelings on everything wrestling, life, and everything that makes him who he is beyond the character that we know as Austin Aries. Austin, man, how are you doing?
That was actually really good. I think I like that better than mine.
It's just habit, man. When it's time to kick in and go,
You've done this.
You've
You've done this a couple times. I like it.
Yeah, but what I didn't do is say I'm Jeff Townsend, but that was not important because
now you just did, and now everyone knows who you are, Jeff Townsend.
I'm just a podcasting
Jeff Townsend
guy.
Media.
That's all I am. Jeff Townsend Media, podcasting Jeff the podcaster, whatever you want to call me.
I like it. I think that's our intro right there. I think that's the one we should use.
Let's use it. Let's do it.
All right.
Absolutely. So can I kick it off? Because I do have a question about this. You've made a great point with not Austin Aries, because that's who you've been portraying as a profession for over 20 years now. I don't know, 23 years probably. You're going on 45 years old, I think, if I remember correctly.
Thank you.
And this has been a huge part of you. And it just like with me and podcasting, right? It's like a persona that kicks on when the light comes on per se, or the record button comes on, like you just saw a while ago when we were doing it. But we all have issues outside of our life that go on that my listeners would never know of before until recent. I even spoke of some things. Mm-hmm. So my big thing for you, man, is like, how long did it take for you to kind of get lost in this Austin Aries character? I don't want to say lost. I'm going to say fully absorbed in it to the point where you could almost lose track of, like you said, who Daniel is. Does that question make sense, what I'm asking?
100%. 100%. And it's a question I've asked myself a lot in the last few years. It's weird, right? So no other entertainer, an actor, assumes that role 24/7, right? And none of the fans, when they go meet an actor, expect them to be the character they saw in the movie, right? Like nobody goes up to Sylvester Stallone and thinks he's Rocky and expects him to be Rocky, right? We all understand that they're playing a part. With pro wrestling, like we're blurring that line, and sometimes we're blurring the line for ourselves as much as we're trying to blur it for the fans. So I think that for me, especially when I was really, really in this full time, where it was, and it has to be, it's a dedication. It's your life. It becomes a lifestyle, right? It really does. At least it did for me. And so, you can start to really, assume that character, more than you realize, or because you're never outside of the pro wrestling bubble on your day-to-day life, even, you never really have a moment to step back and not be some form of Austin Aries. Right. And so, it's an interesting question, and one that I had to, again, I started doing this when I was 22 years old, fresh out of dropping out of college and, being a mule, to make some money. That highly don't recommend that to anybody.
Did you drop out of college to do this, or did you?
No, I did it to make money after I dropped out of college, because before that I was making money just collecting the financial aid. Not quite realizing that, you got to pay that back at some point, right?
I was about to say that.
Yeah,
collecting,
and most of it just went to the bars and to the liquor store and to Domino's Pizza, and I actually kept one of my old checkbooks from that time period just to remind myself of where I've been and where I've gone, right? Because it was, I'd get $2,000 extra at the end of the, paying off the school tuition, and you just see, it would say Bullseye Beer Hall, 3rd Street Liquor, Bullseye Beer Hall, 3rd Street Liquor, just every day drinking, partying at the bar. But yeah, so once I, a couple of years and realized this isn't what I wanted to do, I dropped out, collected that last semesters of financial aid, and then had to figure out how I was going to make money. And life led me that direction. And so I did that for a little while, and good learning experience. Again, I'm very grateful and thankful that, it never landed me behind bars, because there certainly was a couple of opportunities where that could have happened. Um, but yeah, so, you really go from like, what are you going to do with my life? I mean, that was my question. Like, I'm 20, 22, no college education, half of a college education. And now you're trying to figure out, what am I going to do for my life? And wrestling found me. And the minute I saw the ring set up, in that small garage in Minnesota, I knew that, oh, this is what I'm doing. And there wasn't any question. There wasn't any second guessing. It was, one track mind, and so I did whatever I had to do. I moved up on my buddy's couch, started giving plasma a couple times a week to pay my camp dues, took odd jobs at a temp service, doing concrete work at 6 a.m. for $7.50 an hour, whatever it was.
Yeah.
There was no GoFundMe back then, so you had to kind of fund yourself. And,
Yeah. No one would have
but
funded you anyway.
no, absolutely not. But yeah, but it never bothered me, because I was so excited to have this opportunity to pursue this dream, right? To be a pro wrestler. And that was my dream. Just when someone said, what do you do for a living? My answer was, I'm a pro wrestler. That was my goal from day one. And so, 4 years later, I accomplished that goal, and started, making enough scratch to, not have to do my waiter job anymore, and wait tables. I wasn't making a ton of money, but it was enough to quit all the side hustles. But I think, for me, at least in part, to be successful and to get where I did, I had to be submersed in it. It had to be my life. And over time, you start to, when I first started, I was just about being a good wrestler, just what I did in between the ropes in the ring. And that was how I was trying to make my name, being a really good in-ring wrestler. And then along the way, I realized, oh, I need to develop a character. I need something more than just being a good wrestler, because that's a really hard dollar to earn physically. Right. And so, develop this greatest man that ever lived persona, the ultimate bad guy, who could cheer for a guy who calls himself the greatest man that ever lived? Like, right. Like the most obnoxious title you could possibly think of, which I basically, stole from the Weezer song that I heard when I was out in LA, and the Weezer song came on the radio. I was like, man, this song is epic. And it's like
awesome.
exactly what I was thinking of. Right. So, yeah. And then you start like having more success, the more you dive into this character, the more success you're having. And, in my real life, I've always struggled with, you know, I guess maybe making people like me, right? I mean, going back to like, kindergarten, first grade, and like just wanting like to fit in, and like never feeling like I could fit in, whether it was like my weird social anxiety or quirky sense of humor or just whatever it was, right? I always struggled to fit in. I was always different. And so in pro wrestling, it's like, okay, well, the way I was trained was you need to do one of two things. You either got to make people love you or make them hate you. Because if they're in the middle and they're indifferent, there's no money in indifference, right? You need to elicit a strong emotional reaction. So I found it much easier to be that character that would get under people's skin and make them hate me, and then let the other guy be the hero and shut my mouth when it was time. And I enjoyed that, and I've talked about this a little in some other interviews. The part that I love the most about being the ultimate heel, the ultimate bad guy, for those non-wrestling fans who are listening, that we call it a heel, is listening. I always realized that the more I can make them hate me, the more I can get under their skin, the lower I can take them. That means that when it's time for me to get what's coming to me, I can take them that much higher. I can make them enjoy it that much more. Right. And so some of my favorite moments is like laying in that ring and listening to the fans just beside themselves with joy because Austin Aries got beat and finally got what he deserved, and that was because I would say a lot of times in life, the bad guys win. Right. The bad guys don't always get what they deserve. Sometimes they end up, on top. They end up successful. They end up in positions of power, and they got there, by being a bad guy. And so I thought in this world, I can give them the ultimate satisfaction, and I can give them the end of the story that says the bad guy got what he deserved. So, um, but yeah, and so you just really commit to it. And I've always been a bit of a method actor. I've been told that, it's like I assume the character when I step out of that curtain, especially like I'm in that mode, right? Like I am now a different person. I'm no longer Daniel. I'm Austin Aries. And there's a lot of things Austin Aries would say and do, and ways he would act, ways he would look at people, the ways he would respond to people that Daniel would never do in real life, And so in some ways, I think that's why pro wrestlers, we gravitate towards this because, and entertainers in general, is we get to, separate and maybe live vicariously in some ways through the character and do things or say things or act in ways that we can't do in real life, either because it's not appropriate or because it's just not who we are.
Yeah. It's not natural, right? I mean, it's not.
It's not. No.
It's not healthy either.
It's not healthy, right? And so, yeah, but when you do that then for your whole adult life, and it's basically all you know and all you do, you can lose yourself in that. Right. Because there wasn't enough moments where I just got to be Daniel compared to how often I was being and playing Austin Aries. And so you don't realize it until one day you go, wait a second, people are saying all these terrible things about me, accusations and innuendos and rumors. Is that really who I am? And that was the question I'd ask myself. I took a lot of heat for some different things, and I had to step back and go, whoa, wait a minute. Now, is this these people who don't really know Daniel saying these things because the Austin Aries characters convinced them in their mind that this is the same, that this is who I am? Or have I become that in some ways? Have I actually taken on some of these characteristics without me realizing it? And so that was part of, for me, the journey of stepping out of the pro wrestling bubble, really truly disconnecting from it for the first time in my whole adult life, and answering some of those questions and spending time completely outside that wrestling community, surrounding myself with people who didn't know who Austin Aries was and didn't care, and valued me for who I was outside of that. And it was really healthy and needed, and I'm glad I did. And I think part of that too is it allowed me now to come back with a completely different perspective of what this is and what my role in it needs to be moving forward for me to be happy and successful.
Which is exactly why we're doing this. But I'm sure along the way over the last 20 years, there were certain points in time when you were like, you kind of felt this problem that we're talking about, but you probably were so far too deep that you just kept pushing with what you were doing. But I'm sure there's moments when there are along the way where there's like character issues, like who am I really? But you just got to push on because that's what you're doing in the living, and you're so deeply into it.
Yeah. Or I think that you're so immersed in it that you don't even ask that question because it doesn't even register that that there's this, that you're kind of losing yourself. Or again, like, did I even know who I really was at 22? Does anybody really know who they are at 22? I mean, honestly,
great point.
We're trying to figure that out. And so before maybe I really got to figure out who I was, because up until that point, who I was all these labels that were put on me, oh, you're the poor kid. Oh, you're the small kid. Oh, you're the athlete. Oh, you're the pot smoker. Oh, you're the party guy. Right. I mean, not really.
You're
like
the asshole. You're the asshole. No, I'm just kidding.
Asshole Dan. I was the asshole.
Asshole Dan. That's your nickname, huh?
It was, yeah. We had our group of friends in our group of friends in college. There was 3 different Dans, so we had a different which Dan it was, and I was asshole Dan, and and my dad's asshole Dan, so I'm asshole Dan Jr. That's where I got it from. Like I think I'm a lot like my father in that way, right? Like my father's got like just a fucking huge heart, right? Give you the shirt off his back. But he's got this sense of humor, and also like there's a line that when you cross it, right is right, wrong is wrong. And if you go, he'll be an asshole, right? Like, and so I think that, I'm a little bit like that, so, or a lot like that, depending on your perspective.
You talked about 22 years old. That's a really rough age as far as you're really just getting, I don't know if rough's the right word, but you're just getting into adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
You're just starting to not even figure out who you are, but who you might possibly be one day. Then you're emerged in this world of wrestling.
Yeah.
You're surrounded by people who, although you have a different personality than them, it's not, you're surrounded with people who are doing the same thing. There's not like a situation where there's any sort of intervention or help. Like that's all your lives, and you're still developing who you are, and you carried that for a very long time.
Yeah. And you're in a very competitive space. Right. And I've always been very competitive. I grew up an athlete, so I'm a fierce competitor. So, we're all chasing this same dream, and there's only so many spots, and so, looking back, if there's one thing that I would improve on, would be to nurture and make more meaningful relationships, and also enjoy the journey as opposed to just being so focused on the destination, and but yeah, you're 22, and all of a sudden, society puts a lot of pressure on you to have this figured out, and start paying your own bills, and be your own man. And you're still a kid in a lot of ways, trying to figure out, like, what's this world about? Where do I fit into it? Um, so yeah, I think that's really part of it. And so, to your question that you said earlier, like, I don't know that I knew who I was at that age. So you kind of morph into this character, and then you keep having more and more success the more that you go down that path. It does become a part of who you are, and so it probably wasn't until I hit my midlife crisis that I had to take a step back and go, wait a second, you know okay, you've been doing this for 20 years now, but, like, wait a minute, like, there's more to life than this, and there's more to you than this, right? There's other parts of you that you're now starting to explore and figure out, and have a better understanding of who you are, and for me, the world of pro wrestling was very difficult to navigate because, historically, it wasn't always made up of the kindest, figures, right? There was a seedy side of pro wrestling that I, had to figure out when I broke in, that I wasn't really smart to, and you have to figure out how to navigate that while you're trying to make your way up this ladder. And then, that's where you start to figure out where your moral compass points, which direction, and what you're willing to do or not willing to do, or how you're willing to act, how you're not willing to act to get where you want to go. And that was difficult early on, of that realization, and then having to go, well, this is kind of the path you chose, and this is what you're going to have to deal with if this is what you're going to do.
Can you think of any moments directly that come to mind when at cross points that in these situations that you're talking about, a different time in your career and your life?
Just and I'll say this, like, I'm glad that the industry has changed, in a lot of ways, but just the behavior that was accepted, right? The way that women were treated, or the expectation, you know, or just even as a guy, being propositioned by promoters, in a roundabout way, and then having to realize that was, just like in other entertainment avenues, like, that's a part of this world too, right? And so, um, just a lot of those things, right? And yeah, and then it was a very competitive space, and not everyone is trying to help you succeed, because if they help you succeed, it might mean that that's their spot, so there's a lot of selfishness, and there's a lot of, um, lack of transparency, lack of honesty, a lot of people who, smile to your face and stab you in the back, I've always, you know good or bad, right or wrong, whether it's served me or not, I've always been a honest, transparent person. I don't. It's hard for me to lie. It's hard for me to come with a secret agenda on my mind when I go about meeting somebody or having a conversation. I am who I am. I'm a pretty open book. no skeletons in my closet that I'm trying to hide. And I just kind of throw things on the table and let the chips fall where they fall. And that doesn't always serve you well in this industry, or at least it hadn't.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things where it's your greatest strength, but it's also your greatest weakness in
Mhm.
some regards. And that,
Yeah.
I don't want to say downfall because you haven't fall. I mean, you are able to still work. There have been those before you though that they're even more extreme than your case. Obviously, different person, and however they're done with it for good because of something that happened. So I do want to ask you though, and I don't want to like make it too much about wrestling, but as far as your identity and all that, so you go to Ring of Honor.
Hmm.
You're very, I'm sure that was like a big change too, like as far as the level in your career that you're going. But you
Sure.
were very involved there, just like a lot of people are training wise, right? Like Brian Danielson, CM Punk, yourself. You're very involved in the process there. What's it like when you're there doing that to your identity? And then when you go beyond that, you're kind of in a whole other world where I don't want to say you don't matter as much, but you have to accept the fact that it's not quite the same. I'm sure that can be a little bit different on your self identity as well.
Yeah, and I think it's why I had some issues when I went from Ring of Honor to TNA.
Yeah,
I left a place where I was, the champion, where my input was valued, where I was, close with Gabe, a lot of the decisions that were going on, um, and I had a lot of pride, um, in being in that position, and I
because
had a
you
lot of
felt like you were a big
loyalty.
part of it, right? Like you were a big
Well, I
part
said,
of it.
we were all a big part of it.
Yeah, that's
I
what I'm
mean, we really,
saying. Yeah,
but that was, and that was also like, that's how I kind of felt was cultivated there, was we all were a big part of it. We were
yeah.
all building this together. And, there's always some level of hierarchy in any industry, in any, job or business. Um, but, I had a sense of loyalty there because it was the place that put me on the map. I believed in what they were doing. Um, and then, yeah, then I, transitioned to TNA, and for all intents and purposes, as you said, we're kind of told you don't matter. You're just an X division guy. You're just down, I mean, I remember when I went there, and, you know, I, I was making, I was making more money at Ring of Honor. And when I went there, they said, well, now you're going to make this. It's like, but I've already been making that. It's like, well, yeah, but in the pecking order here, you're down here now. It's like, and it's just, yeah, that
And you
was,
can't work there anymore.
and you can't work there anymore. Right. And
There
so,
was that horror deal. Yeah, but
yeah. And, again, one of my biggest strengths, and also my biggest weaknesses is, I can be emotional, and in pro wrestling, that's great because we're trying to evoke emotions. So if you can pour that emotion out in your work, in the ring, in your performance, that's going to yank it out of other people. But sometimes for me, behind the scenes, keeping that emotion in check and being able to understand the politics and how the game is played, and saying the right thing and doing the right thing. Man, I failed at that, more than once. And because again, my whole thing is like, we're all men here, look me in the eye and shoot me straight, you know, treat me with respect. I treat you with respect, take us out of this pro wrestling bubble. We're just two human beings on this planet. There is no hierarchy, right? It's a made up thing. So I don't think that, you know, treating people like they're beneath you just because in this made up world of, make believe, this guy's got some, fake title belt, and this guy doesn't. So this guy is worth more than this guy. It's an interesting concept when you break it down and you look at it for what it is. And, so yeah, that was difficult at times, and I definitely pushed back. And I don't know if it was the right or the wrong thing, because ultimately, when I look at it, I ended up coming back and being a 3-time world champion there. And I feel like
yeah,
if maybe I just accepted, where they were trying to pigeonhole me, or accepted being, just an X division guy, and not stood up for myself and not voiced my opinion, maybe they never would have seen me as that when I came back. I don't know. Who knows? Um, but it's also part of the learning process, part of the growth process, part of the maturation process. And I think more than anything else is I wanted to be an important part because I wanted to, just like I did in Ring of Honor, like I wanted to help that place grow and get bigger and get better. And I thought I could do that if I was, put in a position to at least, you know, have that relationship with the people that were making decisions.
Yeah. And TNA still was not some huge corporate enterprise. And even WWE, you hear stories about how you can talk to the owner directly, the highest up, but
Sure.
there's still a pecking order, like you said, to your point, that a lot of people, especially in a more veteran position that have been there longer, like to keep that in line. Was your personal life like, what did you do when you left, or when wrestling was over for the day? Like, were you even able to turn off the Austin Aries thing, or like, I mean, how does that work? Because you're on to the next thing almost. It's like the story progresses. The story of life, like my work's different, right? Like I'm doing a lot of the same things, but you're like in this constant story moving along in your real life. Then you have this Austin Aries life as well that has a story going on at the same time. Did you find those often colliding?
Yeah, well, I mean, even too, it's, you get done with the show, and if you go to the bar afterwards and there's a bunch of wrestling fans in there, you still have to be on, you know, so you didn't shut it off. And then for me also, I dated some women in the wrestling industry. So even when I was home, there was still this element of being in the wrestling world, right? Like there was no
Mm.
off. And that again, if you could go back and do some do-overs, I'd probably would make some different decisions as far as my relationships went, right? And not blending those things together. When it works, it can be wonderful. And when it doesn't work, it can be extremely difficult, because you've tied your work to your personal life. So
Which in any other
yeah,
industry, it's not a good idea. And
it's not, and
it's commonly
someone gave me
said.
the old shirt, "Don't shit where you eat," and
Yeah, yeah,
you know, but live and learn, as they say.
yeah. Oh, this is a great discussion because I can see what you're saying about you're just an X division guy, like you said, but you were and one day we'll talk about it in further detail. But for your personality wise, did it like grow your ego more positively or negatively when you're in this situation where were you the first person to be able to hand this title in and get a shot at the heavyweight title? Were you the first that could do that?
Yeah.
If I remember, what was that like to you? To your actual identity as Daniel? That moment, because like you said, you've been told you're just an X Division guy, and in this storyline, literally, your life becomes the here it is. It is your life, I guess is what I'm saying. Like that's the storyline. You've always been told,
Right.
Austin Aries, that you are an X Division guy, but you as Daniel felt I'm just an X Division guy. So when this time comes and you can kind of do that, have that opportunity, like share with us how your actual identity in life, how you felt about that and what impact that had on you.
Um, I just remember at the time, it felt like everything was falling into place, right? Like everything I had been working for, um, was starting to come into focus. I was getting this opportunity. Um, it wasn't because it was an opportunity that was earmarked for me or because I had friends on the creative team. It was really just because organically what I was doing week in and week out was resonating with the fans, and the company was listening and decided to pull the trigger and put me in that position. And, in some ways at the time, I felt like it kind of validated, some of the issues I had with the company prior, because I had left there twice, before I came back and, you know, won the world championship. And so I felt like, man, like, all right. Cause you always wonder, like, could I play that differently? Did I maybe I should have just, kept quiet, minded my P's and Q's. But man, when I came back, first thing I did when I came back, was it 2011? is I made a couple apologies, right?
Mhm.
Like Pat Kinney, Simon Diamond. He was one of my agents. And I remember I'd get so hot at Pat because he'd give me some finish that made no sense. Right. And I'd be asking him, like, try to make sense of it. And like, at the time I'm not, he's just doing his job. Right. And so
Yeah.
I'm taking out on him, and it's not his fault. Right. But I didn't have anybody else to vent to because I wasn't in a position to where I could go talk to the people that made the decision. I had to deal with the agent, right? And so I would take my frustrations out on the agent. And so I remember that's the first thing I did is I found him. I said, "Hey man, I just want to apologize if I was, a pain in the ass or disrespectful to you back when I was here. Like I didn't, I wasn't able to channel my frustrations, in the right way." And I sincerely meant that. I wasn't doing that to score any points or whatever. But upon reflection, I realized, like, oh man, like this guy's just trying to collect his paycheck and do his job, and I'm not making it any easier because he probably knows that it's a bullshit finish or doesn't make any sense, but he can't do anything about it. So he's just trying to do the best he could. So, um, when I came back there, I was grateful for the opportunity. I was in a better headspace in my personal life. I'd gone through a rough stretch in like 08, 09, 010, a couple of years there. And so I was really motivated to make the most of it. And I did, and so, um, you know, Daniel was feeling pretty good about things. That was my breakthrough moment where I felt like, okay, because I was pretty close to walking away. Um, you know, I was spinning my wheels. I was making enough money to pay the bills, but not enough to like save up. And it's like, well, how much longer can I keep doing this? I've been doing it almost 10 years at that point. And so then finally I broke through and had my first like big money year and won the world
Mhm.
championship. And it was a bit of validation, and within the matrix I was living in and within the bubble that I was living in, I was successful, and I was starting to be validated in that.
You realize later how cool it is, but on the other end of it, you realize, not to sound shitty, but that doesn't really even matter. You know what I mean?
No,
Like
100%. I
it's
look
like a
back and now
mixed
I'm like,
feelings.
man,
It's
you were
like,
so immersed in it. You thought it was like so, like you thought all this was so important, right? And that's the thing I chuckle at. And I think back to some of you know the way I looked at things and how I held them, so tightly and got so upset about certain things, and I just kind of laugh now, after the last couple of years and the journey I've been on, and I just go, man, you were so stupid, like you were so silly, right? But you were in it, like you're fully immersed, and it's everything. It's everything you've been pouring your life into, all the time and the money and the effort, like it was everything, and so yeah, of course, you do that. And it was hard to like have that other perspective because I didn't have a counterbalance, and so I look back now and I'm like, oh man, like so silly, right? But like maybe that was, again, for my journey, um, what I had to do to get where I went, and then two, what I had to go through to learn that lesson now later in life, and to be able to look back and go, okay, yeah, like you know and so I just, I have a completely different perspective on wrestling. I have a different perspective on like what it means to me, and so if and when I do go back to any, major company of prominence, more full-time schedule, if that's on the cards, um, I'm excited to be able to bring this kind of fresh perspective,
yeah,
along with the knowledge and experience and what I can still do in the ring, but kind of bring this like more lighthearted and relaxed perspective to this. And because it's not everything, and it's not my life, right? It's not my life and all of it. It's just a part of it. And there's so many other things out there that are more important. And honestly, and we'll probably talk about this in another episode, but when I was in Mexico, I did some plant medicine ceremonies. I did bufo, and ayahuasca a couple times. And if you want something to put your life into perspective, or even better, to put your death into perspective, well, that's it. And it completely changes your whole view on this whole thing that we're doing here, and how silly we are. And so, yeah, it's been a trip, man. It's been a trip. And I think back to really like those heavy years of wrestling. And sometimes I just kind of chuckle at myself and go, man, like you thought you were doing your best. I was doing my best. Right. And I was trying to be
Yeah.
successful and succeed and have all the hard work pay off. But it's funny is because you get there and you get to this level of now success and you made it. And then you realize like, oh shit, that wasn't it. Like,
Yeah.
wait a minute. I'm not really completely satisfied. Like there's something still missing.
Is this life?
I thought that was it. Well, now what do I do? Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
now where do I go? So yeah, man, good stuff.
It always fascinates me that like if I go to work and I have a problem, right, that doesn't play out in a storyline at my profession. Like they don't give a shit what I have going on
Right.
outside of there. Just deliver results and all the different things that I do.
Sure.
In your case, the personal issues you talked about in 08 and 09, we won't go into, but it's related to people in wrestling.
Yeah.
That's a part of your life.
Yeah.
And then you have everything just becomes a part of your life with wrestling. So you have a storyline later. Hey, I'm going to hand this title in. I just set the world free of the X division. I am the example. I paved the way. That's the whole storyline. And that's also how you feel in your head. It just fascinates me how life lives out in your profession and wrestling, because it is not like that in anything else that I've ever heard of. Like I said, my job, they don't care. You know what I mean? But we
Sure.
often see in wrestling, like with Edge and Lita, Matt Hardy, like that crap just comes alive. It becomes part of the story. That doesn't happen in anything else, man.
No, and I had a little bit of that myself, right? I was going through a difficult breakup at that time period, and then I found myself in a storyline with her while the breakup's happening,
Yeah.
right? And you got to come to work and you got to be professional, to the best of your ability. But man, it's difficult, and again, that's why like don't shit where you eat, but yeah, it's there's nothing like the world of pro wrestling. So if you're listening to this and you're not a pro wrestling fan and you know me through, some other avenues, it's the most unique art form and entertainment world you can find. Again, because in no other entertainment world are we trying to blur the lines of where the performer stops and the person starts. Except pro wrestling. Again, if you meet Hugh Jackman on the street, you don't think he's really the Wolverine. But when fans meet Daniel Sowald on the street, they think and expect him to be Austin Aries. And, for me, I always felt like if I was doing my job to the best of my ability and being professional, that I would give him that. Even if it was in a place where they weren't expected. I always said this. Here's a quick story I'll share. You ever heard of Big Lots? It's a store.
Yes, I have. Yes.
I love me some Big Lots. I'm just going to put it out there. Love me some Big Lots. Spent a lot of time at Big Lots over the years. Can always find some good deals there, and I'm a deal hunter, right? And so
it's a working man store.
Yeah. And so when I lived in Clearwater, I had a Big Lots just right down 2 minutes down the road. And so one day I was doing some stuff around the condo and, I don't remember what it was, like some paint tape, or I was in the middle of painting something and, doing some stuff in the house. And I needed some paint tape or a couple of things. So I just ran down to Big Lots really quick and I got my scrubs on. I got, some ratty shorts and flip flops and a t-shirt, cut off t-shirt, I'm in the midst of working on the place. Right. So I get into Big Lots and I'm grabbing a couple things, and these three kids come up to me and they go, "Oh my God, are you Austin Aries?" And I just looked at myself. I said, "Not right now, I'm not." And I just walked away and left, right? Like I felt terrible. I was like, I just killed this whole mystique for these kids. This is supposed to be the greatest man that ever lived, right? They never see me in anything but a blazer and sunglasses. And here I am, like, and I just thought to myself, if I was like 8 years old and I was at Kmart with my mom and I saw Ric Flair in there with some sweatpants and a t-shirt on, right? And a baseball cap. It would have
Yeah.
killed it for me. It would have completely like, I thought you were the nature boy, right? And like, he was the nature boy. He was the nature boy everywhere he went. He didn't play the nature boy on TV. He's the nature boy, Ric Flair, right? And so the wrestling I grew up on, these guys weren't playing a character and then they went on their social media and then, you know, it wasn't like Arn Anderson, okay, now I'm Marty on my social media account. Like Arn Anderson's
Yeah.
Arn Anderson, right? And so that's the wrestling I grew up on. So that was what I emulated in a lot of ways, right? I wanted to give the fans, again, Nikita Koloff changed his name to Nikita Koloff, right? Like this is the commitment of that era
Yeah.
of the wrestler. And so that's the wrestling I grew up on. And that was the training I had to where that was a level of commitment that was almost expected if we were going to do this and respect the industry and be successful at it. And so I did try to give that 110%, sometimes to my own detriment, you know, sometimes to a bit of a character assassination to Daniel. Right. So, but that was it, man. It was for the love and commitment and respect to this weird ass industry that I decided to make my life.
That you don't necessarily owe anything to per se, but you certainly felt so. I mean, so if we take this outside of, we're obviously on the back end here of this particular episode. If we take this outside of wrestling, what is some advice you would give to people just about identity, or maybe even people that are in wrestling having the same issue, or like I said, just everyday life? Like, what's your big takeaway from it? What did you have to do to realize this? Did you have to hit rock bottom, man? Does everybody have to hit rock bottom before they realize this? They have to have you quoted it as a midlife crisis. Does that have to be the case?
Um, so part of me thinks that for a lot of us, it's the natural progression of our life here, right, in the physical form. And I don't want to get like too deep and too like go off on like too much of a left turn here and start getting all into spiritual and energy and dimensions and all these things that we'll talk about another time. But identity, really, at the end of the day, is all just these constructs and these layers that get heaped upon us by society, by our parents, by our teachers, by our job, right? By our relationship status, by our financial status. And, you know, sometimes like you have to find a way if it calls you, right? And you don't have to do anything, but if it calls you, if there's something that doesn't feel right, is you have to find a way to be able to strip all of those layers away and really, who am I in my essence? Not even my physical body, right? Because that's just a physical body. But again, this is where meditation is coming big for me, and breath work and these things where you silence all this chatter in your head, which a lot of it was programming from when you were kids, right? The way you talk to yourself was the way that somebody talked to you at some point in your life, and you just picked up on that, and now you start repeating that voice in your head. I'm not good enough. I'm this. I'm that. Whatever. And you got to find a way to strip away all of those labels and layers of identity and figure out, like, in your essence, in your core, your spirit, your soul, your energy, who am I? If I take all these things away and I go sit, there's a woman I follow named Blue. She's got a great podcast, right? And she did 4 days of complete darkness, right? Like underground. So no senses, no sound, no sight, right? And just had to sit with herself. That, to me, like, that's taken it to a different level of really figuring out, like, who am I? Not my job title, not my relationship status, not my financial status, not my physical form, but who am I in here? Who am I in here? And so, you know, I think that, you know, if I was going to give anybody advice, I'd say don't take advice from me. What the fuck do I know? But if you do, is if something isn't sitting right and it's not resonating, or you don't feel happy, or you don't feel satisfied, or you don't feel like you, find a way to do that. Go inside. Stop looking externally for the answers. And I think that's what we've been kind of taught to do in this world is to look for all the answers externally, and the answer is internal, and we got to turn inside and really examine what's in there, and separate from all these things that have been placed on us by the external world. And so whether it's through meditation, whether it's, through these different modalities, plant medicine ceremonies, as I mentioned, I'm not going to recommend that for anybody, but I know it definitely has helped a lot of people gain a new perspective of themselves, where they fit in this universe. That would be my advice, is to stop looking externally for the answers, and look internally, quiet the mind, and go into the soul.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point when you said it was an exact quote from you, but following your instincts, right? If you have a certain feeling about something, you know, you should probably think about that twice.
Yeah. And everything. Listen to it. Listen to that little voice in your head. You know. Um, yeah.
Well, I'm sure thinking about life right now, man. But this is your show. I don't want to hijack it. This has been an
It's all
amazing
good.
conversation, though.
Well, yeah, well, hopefully one of many. And I got some, man. I got some really cool people I met outside the wrestling world, especially in the last few years. And I want to talk about some of these things. I want to talk about that journey of self, finding true happiness, struggling with things like depression and anxiety, addiction, is a big one. It's something I've been battling my whole life. I have an addictive personality, and addictions can be to anything. It doesn't have to be necessarily to drugs or alcohol. And sometimes very benign things, if you can't have a good relationship with it, can become destructive. And, I think, one of my, and we talked about this, off the air, is I don't want to do any editing on this show. I want this to be raw and real. And I just want to, I think one of my gifts is being transparent and being real, because I think that, if you're in a position of celebrity, and to some people I've never felt that way about myself, but other people feel that way about me. But when you're willing to not try to be perfect, and to not feel like you have to portray an image, and you can just get real and admit failures and admit struggles and admit things that you've gone through, I think it can help other people who just think that they're normal people to realize, like, oh shit, like, I'm not alone in this, right? Here's this like super successful guy who's battled all these same things that I'm battling. And they can maybe take something from that, or feel like they're not alone, and maybe give them some strength to, to figure out a way to improve those things, So, yeah, man, we're going to be transparent here. We're going to just put it on the table, be real, not playing any characters on the Austin Aries show. I know it's called the Austin Aries show, but that's just because that's the name people know. If I called it the Daniel Sowald show, nobody would know what the fuck it was. So, and I think the other part of this is, like, you know, we're allowed to, and it's okay to have different personas and personalities and characters. Like, we can have depth, right? Like, we just have to know, like, we have to know how and when we need to separate them, and if it's not serving us. But we can have these, and it's something I've struggled with. I'm always like, I need to be like this kind of person. And it's like, okay, but I like this, and that's counter to that, right? It's like, oh, I need to be in, like, yoga and meditation and breath work, and oh, but I like sports, and I like, and sometimes I like to listen to heavy metal music. Well, that's not living the yoga life. And it's like, hey, it's cool, man. Like, you can be all of it.
Yep.
It's okay. You can have range, you can have depth, you can still be practicing yoga meditation, and then go, listen to some heavy metal music at the gym, or, lose yourself in, some bad movie or something. Like, it's, we're all complex creatures, and it's okay to be complex, and have multiple components to our personality and to our character.
Yeah, because say I'm Jeff Townsend, that still doesn't. I'm still not the same Jeff Townsend I am on the air, or I'm going to be changing poop diapers when we're done recording here. For an
That's
example,
right.
like,
Yeah.
it's a completely separate thing,
And just to clarify, not your own.
not my own. and not an adults. Just to clarify.
Just want to make sure. Well, you never know these days, right?
Yeah. Well, some people are into some weird things. Maybe we'll talk about that on another episode. But
yeah.
But who knows where you'll take us? You're a man of
who
mystery.
Knows? Yes. Well, should we wrap this one up? Because otherwise, I don't want to be doing 2-hour podcasts again at that Chris Van Vliet show. Oh man. Well, let's talk about the Chris Van Vliet interview one of these times. Holy cow, that one's hard.
I
for me
would like
watch.
to, because that's part of the reason we connected, right? I saw that and I was like, man, this can't be who this guy is. Holy shit. And that's here we are today. So I'm excited. Like I said, we'll have to talk about that, I think, for sure. And he's going to have to get you on there for a new one. But
yeah, we've been talking about doing another interview, and I'd like to maybe get him on this one. I'm sure he's pretty busy.
He's been on my other podcast, so he might as well. He's a good dude.
Be great.
So
you know who else?
These.
Go ahead. I would say this. So I just thought, like, who do I really want to have on here? You know who I want to have on one of my future episodes?
Who?
John Morrison. I'm going to bring John on here and talk. Think that'd be interesting? I think that'd be interesting.
Yeah. I've always wanted to talk to that guy. He's always been of interest to me. So you can pull that out, man. My inner fanboy I'll be able to handle myself, put it that way.
Yeah. I think people would be interested to hear us have a conversation too.
Yep. So we're going to drop these. We're going to try to do it every Tuesday on YouTube, on Spotify, Apple, wherever you can listen to podcasts or watch the video. We'll try to have it there. We'll have the AustinAriesShow.com up and going. And what was the email that we could start getting some opinions? So I want to reach out to you. It was AustinAriesShow@gmail.com, I believe. Yeah.
Yep. You got it. Yeah. I send an email, questions, suggestions for good guests that you think would be interesting.
Yeah.
Comments, concerns, death threats, whatever you want to send. It's all good.
Like I started out with, and I'll end it. He's been canceled twice. Will he go for a third time?
I haven't, but that's the thing, Jeff. I want to clarify. I haven't been canceled once.
No.
Because you can only be canceled if you comply and you play along. And I have nothing to be canceled for. So you can't cancel me. You cannot listen to me, and that's fine. Right? But you can't cancel me because
it's just a word.
A, I didn't do anything to be canceled for, but two, like, I refuse to be canceled. Right? But now say I was canceled. Well, then what the fuck's it matter what I say anymore? Right? Then it doesn't matter. I got, it's free game to just say and do what I want. I'm already canceled. Doesn't bother you. But no, I think that whole thing's ridiculous. I think all of it's ridiculous.
I just like getting you fired up by saying it. That's all.
Yeah, I know.
Nevertheless, we will be back next week. And until then, like you said, reach out, let us know how you feel. And I'm excited about having these conversations about who you are as a person, man. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to get to know you and do this show. I'm excited about the future.
I'm excited too, Jeff. I appreciate you, man. We'll talk soon. Until next time.
We'll talk soon.
Safe travels.
All right. This is Jeff Townsend. Thanks for checking out the Austin Aries Show here on YouTube. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe to it and share it with all your friends. There are plenty more videos for you to check out in the meantime. And this content, of course, is available on all podcast listening platforms. If you want to learn more about the show, go to AustinAriesShow.com.